Hi everybody, it's Eli again, and welcome back to Elfbait. So today I'm going to go ahead and do the Sunday recap. My Sunday game just finished its first adventure, the Sanctuary of the Serpent Sorcerer. That is the game I'm running for basically my family, my wife, my daughter, my nephew, and a couple of the kids' friends. It was a pretty cool adventure, cool session this time around, and they managed to get deep into the sanctuary and explore kind of basically, I think, really the limit of the secrets that were there. So we started off where they had left off, which is after defeating the serpentine humanoid zombies that they had run into on the other side of the tapestry portal. If you recall, I don't know if you recall or not from the last video, but the Dragonborn had accidentally slipped through a portal that was built into, well, not built into, but magical portal in a magic tapestry that was on the wall that had fallen on him, and ended up in another room where he was confronted by 4 zombies that looked like a kind of a humanoid cross between man and snake. They were clearly undead, but they were decked out in priestly robes and stuff. So he had to fight like 2 rounds of combat on his own in that room. And then the rest of the party managed to figure out what was going on, and followed him through the portal and ended up in the room. So at that point, they were able to make pretty short work of the 4 zombie priests, and then continue to explore the rest of the sanctuary. They did make plans to come back and get the tapestry. It was a pretty cool item, and I think their minds were kind of racing around with what possibilities a magical portal disguised as a tapestry could really allow them to do. So as they left the room, they kind of ended up in a long hallway, and it was kind of a north-south kind of a deal. Lots of different side partitions of it. So they explore around the temple some more, and they end up kind of up around the corner from a large open room, and they heard sort of a flapping noise, and I had to laugh because at this point, here's my party of adventurers, and they're all like, wouldn't it be funny if it was flying snakes? And I had to laugh because, yes, indeed, I had written into the adventure that there was a flock of flying snakes layering in that room. And so they got the flying snakes come flapping around, and everybody just loses it because, of course, there's flying snakes. And they didn't believe me at first, so I had to show them on the sheet that I had written up, that it was actually flying snakes, that I wasn't just, riffing off them. Not that that's a bad thing, and you should always riff off your players. But yeah, so the snakes proved to be a pretty savage opponent. There were 8 of them. The bard went down. She failed like 2 poison saves, and so took the extra damage from the snakes. I mean, they only do like 1 point of damage for the actual physical bite, but then it's a D8 poison damage, and she failed both saves, so she went down real quick. So while the rest of the party is trying to smash flying snakes, she was struggling for her life making death saves, and she had 2 successes and 1 fail by the time they were able to stop the fight and recover. So at that point, they did a little bit more exploring. Kind of some interesting foreshadowing as they explored around. They started finding the bodies of previous adventurers. There was like a wizard and a cleric and a fighter and stuff. And off of these bodies, they were finding a few magic items that were sprinkled around there, and it was kind of cool. So that while they were fighting these monsters and stuff that were in there, and more undead and other guardians of the structure, they were finding these items. So they ended up coming down and making their way back down the hall. And as they were going down, they were ambushed by this giant toad-like creature, and it was sort of an odd abomination with the body sort of shaped like a toad, but the head of a serpent, big fangs, venomous fangs coming out. And so they battled that thing. By this point, the party was starting to get kind of figure out where their legs were. The bard had discovered the wonders of the fairy fire spell, and so was basically target marking enemies. The Dragonborn barbarian was making good use of his rage for effect. the Goliath started wielding two weapons and was doing offhanded attacks and stuff like that. So they were actually really starting to get into this combat role, and the Warlock was making good use of Arms of Adar and and Eldritch Bolt when they would get in fights. So they after they fought off the Toad and continued on, they made their way through a kitchen where they found the body of a halfling trying to hide in the oven. Halfling had on it a ring. That was about the only item that he had on it, and yes, that was on purpose. I couldn't help but have them find a halfling with a magic ring. So they peeked through a door and they found, and at this point they'd also learned to be careful. I mean, they're moving through the dungeon and they had hit a few nasty things, and so I think they were really starting to figure out that it was important to move slowly. So they peek through this door and they find out that they see that it leads to a room that's just full of skeletons, just kind of shambling around the skeletal guards that they've been running into throughout the complex, wearing the ancient bronze armor with bronze weapons and very little iron. So they decide to go back around to another door and then realize that door was also leading to the same room. So it's a huge room full of skeletons, and so I had to smile because they decided to make this plan where they were going to open the door slowly far enough for the bard to cast Fairy Fire to mark the targets, and then the Warlock would come around the corner and fire off an Eldritch Bolt down the hall or down the room to use it as a flare because, of course, light energy, and so that was kind of cool. And then, of course, the Eldritch Bolt hit something, and they were worried that there might be something bigger in there, so they jumped in there and they just started brawling with these skeletons. They made pretty short work of the skeletons. They took some damage. By this point, too, the party had already made 2 long rests inside the dungeon. They had negotiated with plenty of time with the what they were calling the Lion Lord, which is the nobleman who had forced them into the sanctuary, the one with the lion breastplate, and they were making use of it. They weren't worried about time. I was checking for random encounters and was my dice were horrible. They weren't having a lot of good dice luck either. I mean, there was, I think, in one combat there were a total of 5 fumbles at one point. So after defeating the skeletons, they did some more searching and they found a side door that led to the exterior of the temple. And this was important because it was an opportunity to possibly escape the temple if they wanted to, without having to go through the camped army and the nobles' army that was out front of the temple in the valley. They decided not to make a run for it just yet, and to kind of use that as their backup in case they needed it. That was at that point they were kind of started to contemplate their exit from the temple, the sanctuary, and so they were. There was some discussion about how to do it. Come out, and see if the noble would honor his deal. At that point, my nephew was playing the human fighter, and my daughter was playing the Genasi warlock. They remembered the secret word that they had heard when they had fallen under the effects of the magic in the Serpentine corridor in that very first room, and they decided that they were before they left the temple. They wanted to go back up to the rune warded gold door that had previously shocked the Dragonborn when he tried to take the door. Dragonborn has decided that Dragonborn barbarian player has decided that his Dragonborn suffers from dragon greed and is very big on grabbing treasure when he can. So they go back up to that door. They say the magic word, which was Athrax, and the door fades from sight, and it reveals this chamber that looks like it's untouched by time. The rest of the sanctuary had been described as being very decayed and decrepit and rotted and even so overgrown in some places. And of course, there's undead and everything everywhere. But so this room was different. It was draped in gold and jewels, and there was incense in there, and all the fabrics and everything looked fresh as ever. There's a big bed in the center of the chamber, and in that bed was sleeping a man in robes. And so there's some discussion about what to do, and the bard got it got the great idea to go, the Genasi bard, that's the other Genasi in the party, to go up and touch the sleeping person. So he wakes up, he sits up, says some words. His eyes open up, and his eyes are serpent's eyes, and he says some words, and he starts to transform, and he starts to elongate and turn into more of a serpentine creature, and attacks them. And so they start fighting this thing, and they're doing pretty well. I mean, he's casting spells at them, and they're saving, so they're actually managing to do pretty well against this creature that they're fighting. They have the numerical advantage, and what I'm learning quickly in 5th edition is that numbers really are a serious advantage. So while they had plenty of actions, this creature just didn't have the economy of action to counter that. So they did beat it. They took some wounds and were bloodied by it, but none of the major spell effects were able to take effect. But after the death of the creature, and it ends up being an illusion, it wasn't actually a man, it was actually some sort of a serpentine guardian, like a bone nogger or something like that. And the temple starts to crumble. The room fades, the decay is apparent, the treasure is still there, so they're trying to gather some of the stuff. They did manage to, on their way out, grab some items that seemed to not decay, and so they were considering that they were possibly magical. There was, I think, a dagger and a book and a staff and a few other things that they managed to get. And so the temple is collapsing around them, and they do this really dramatic escape where they have to go down and back through the chambers, and the floor is opening up, and fire and magma are coming up out of it, and the temple is actually sinking around them as they go through. And through a series of checks, and they make their way out, and they realize that the temple is sunk, and it's actually an uphill climb out of the temple, and the temple doors are lowering down and closing down, and they finally make it out. And they're all kind of tired and bloodied, and I mean, like, a few of them have been hit by falling stones, so there was some damage that had been taken. They were actually carrying one of the party members out, dragging out the human fighter had fallen into one of the fissures. The Goliath was carrying him out at that point, and then they found themselves confronted by the Lion Lord, and he's like, "You!" And he was like, "What have you done?" Because he had hopes of taking the sanctuary. That was the whole reason for sending people in, so he didn't have to use his own men. And so, real quickly, the Goliath Ranger just hands him the staff, and he looks at it, and there's kind of a moment where he just kind of accepts it, and he rides off. His armies panic, and they're fleeing. So the party really quickly rights one of the carts and gets the horses attached to it again, managed to calm some of the horses, and then they ride off. And so that's kind of where we left off. I mean, it was a pretty eventful session. There was a lot of creeping around, and actually, kind of backtrack a bit, one of the things that tipped them off to go check out the door is they did find a piece of writing that had kind of a poem in it. They had also found a undead revenant type of a thing in one of the cells that did some serious damage to him at one point too. So there was a little bit more to it than just the short form I did. But I mean, what are you going to do? You can't really go over each and every encounter. That just kind of gets grindy. But yeah, they managed to make it through. Now they're stuck in the mountains. Well, not stuck, but they're up in the mountains. Most of them are far from home. They don't really quite know exactly where in the mountains they are. And unfortunately, the Goliath is kind of from that area, and so might stand a good chance of being able to navigate around. But yeah, so it's a good session. This is going to be kind of a short recap because there's not a lot of specific things to go over, not a lot of role play. It was a lot of exploration and a lot of dice play this time around, which doesn't make for the best story, but some cool encounters, some puzzle solving. At the end of it, XP wise, most of the party, in fact all of the party, has made it well past 2nd level in XP, and the Genasi Warlock and the Human Fighter, through the merits of a couple of extra XP through puzzles and stuff like that they did that the rest of the party didn't, have made it to 3rd. So actually a pretty fruitful first adventure. I was surprised at how well they performed. Not because they're bad players or anything, but I threw some pretty hardcore monsters at them. And there's a couple of ghouls in there, and those things are like challenge rating 2. Now with a 5-person party, that gives them a bit of an advantage over the standard challenge rating, but that Bone Naga at the end is like challenge rating 4. So that was pretty steep. Flying creatures with poison attacks, while they didn't do a lot of damage, didn't do a lot of damage with their bites, the poison itself was dangerous. So having poison creatures and magic effects and all of that in there really did challenge them. The corpse creature, I used an old school monster called a coffer corpse, from the original Fiend Folio. Found an updated version for 5th edition, and that thing is pretty nasty because it fakes its death after its first 4 hit points of damage, and then comes back and does a nasty, wicked strangle attack if it gets a hold of you, or just keeps crushing the life out of you. And then when it first rises, there's a fear effect. So it's pretty impressive, especially for a first level monster. But I tend to run my games as a living world where things are there because they're there, and then I let the players decide how their characters are gonna act. I mean, I try to be fair, but I do like to throw some challenges out there, and occasionally that means challenges that may be statistically beyond the ability of the party, but that doesn't mean that there aren't solutions. In this case, they were able to actually beat the big nasties, and a good chunk of that was tactics. Finally getting the groove of their characters, numbers factored into that, but also just plain dumb luck. I mean, when everybody's saving against the spells that the Naga is casting at them, what are you going to do? And so it was a cool dramatic ending. The temple sunk into this lava hole, this magma hole, and is just gone from the face of the earth. They're up in the mountains. They've got some cool items, but they've got to figure out where they are. And so we'll see where they go from there. So Sunday games are going to be every other week. So you'll be getting less of these reports simply because I had to make concessions for schedules because I've got kids in the game. So I got to make sure that they have time for their parents. And we've had a couple of kids who couldn't show up because of home life events. Scheduling at work is going to change, so Sunday game might end up being a different day, or just later on Sundays, who knows. But yeah, I mean, that game is going really fun. Other news, was supposed to run the 5th session of Val Morgan's Ledger for my Monday group, but I injured myself on Monday trying to save my cat from the attic, so I called out on that one. It wasn't a serious injury or anything like that, just kind of tweaked my back and stuff like that. But if I'm uncomfortable, I'm not going to be a good DM because I'm just going to be focusing on the discomfort. And I'd rather skip a session than run a bad session. So that's going to be coming up here on the 23rd. We're going to have 5th session. That's when they're going to hopefully make their main play for White Crag Fortress against the Brotherhood of the Red Hand to recover Val Morgan's Ledger. So look forward to that. And in other news, one of the potential players who was supposed to get into my Monday game, his schedule just didn't work out, but he had such a really cool character, and I didn't want to let it go. So we started doing sort of an informal one-on-one game via Skype and Google Hangouts and stuff. We had our first session of that, so I'll be doing another report on that. It was a short one because we had about an hour's worth of technical difficulties and just getting up to speed, but more on that later. Hopefully folks are still enjoying and listening to the trials and tribulations of my various parties and the world I'm creating, because all 3 of these games are in the same campaign setting, the homebrew campaign setting at the same time. And it is my hope that things in one game may inform occurrences and events in other games. So, for example, the online game is a duelist character who is in and so far the campaign is going to be specifically in the city-state of Camwar. Camwar is known as the City of Blades. It's renowned for being a mercenary haven and stuff like that. But stuff that goes on there may carry out to, say, the Monday group, who's adventuring in Aerolith proper, and of course what's going on with the Sunday game, the family game, could have an effect on other things as well. So it's kind of this. We'll see how this all goes, and I'm hoping for some cool synergy. I won't go so far as to say I'll be able to get them all in as some big dream team group, though that would be really cool. A few people have kind of mentioned that would be hard logistically, because the reason that we're playing on different days is just because when people can get in there and actually play. So, yep. So if you're, so keep tuning in. There's lots more adventure tales. I'm considering possibly running the recaps further apart, so I have more to say in each video, because the videos can be pretty short, especially when there's dungeon crawly reports. Because role play stuff takes a little bit more storytelling, especially even in the recaps, so that can fill up a video pretty easy. But dungeon crawls are relatively straightforward. We ran into this, we fought it, we killed it, whatever. Unless there's something special. I've also got some videos for other DMing tips or just gaming general tips that I'd like to touch on and go over those as well. But I think I'm going to call it here. Thanks again. Thanks for tuning in. Comment down below. I will answer your comments. I answer all of them I can right now. We're up to 21 subscribers. That's cool. That's like 3 more since the last time I checked, which was only a few days ago. So that's really cool. If you know somebody who's looking for kind of more grassroots videos to check out, just to see what the every guy's doing. Everybody's playing. This is kind of the every guy, but send them this way. Tell them about Elfbait, link to Elfbait, and see if we can get this thing going as more of a community where I can answer questions. I got to do a video sometime of who I am and where I'm coming from. I realize it's kind of appeared out of nowhere, but yeah, I've been doing this for a while, and I think I certainly have something to contribute to the community as a whole. Anyways, this is Eli from Elfbait. Thanks for tuning in, and get out and game.